Legend says that Rome was born in blood, founded by a man who killed his own brother over a wall that barely stood waist-high. Romulus and Remus, twin sons of the war god Mars, raised by a she-wolf in the wilderness. It sounds like myth because it is myth, but like all great myths, it contains a truth deeper than mere facts. The truth is this: Rome was always going to be violent, always going to be ambitious, always going to be hungry for more. From that first fratricide on the Palatine Hill in 753 BC to the fall of a last emperor in 476 AD, blood would be the currency of Roman power. Blood spilled in conquest across 3 continents. Blood shed in civil wars that tore the republic apart. Blood flowing in rivers through the arena for the entertainment of the mob. This is the complete history of ancient Rome, the empire that rose from a collection of mud huts on 7 hills to become the master of the known world, and then, after 1,000 years of glory, fell into darkness. But let's go back to the beginning, to a time before Rome was Rome, before the legions marched, before the Caesars ruled, before the world trembled at the sound of Latin commands. Picture the Italian peninsula in the 8th century BC, a patchwork of tribes and city-states, each fighting for survival in a world where strength was the only law that mattered. The Etruscans controlled the north with their mysterious civilization and superior metalworking. The Greeks had colonized the south, bringing philosophy and culture to what they considered the barbaric edge of the world. And in the middle, in the region called Latium, along the banks of the Tiber River, a group of Latin shepherds and farmers had built a small settlement on 7 hills that offered protection from floods and invaders. According to legend, Romulus drew a sacred boundary around the Palatine Hill with a plow, declaring that anyone who crossed it without permission would die. His brother Remus, whether out of contempt or jest, jumped over the furrow. Romulus killed him on the spot, and with his brother's blood still wet on his hands, he proclaimed, "So perish anyone who crosses my walls." It was April 21st, 753 BC, and Rome was born. The early Romans faced an immediate problem. They had a city, but no women to populate it. Romulus's solution was characteristically Roman. He invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival, and when they arrived, the Romans kidnapped their daughters. The rape of the Sabine women, as it became known, led to war, but eventually the Sabine women themselves intervened, standing between their fathers and their new Roman husbands, refusing to let either side destroy the other. The two peoples merged, and Rome's population doubled overnight. These stories, the she-wolf, the fratricide, the abduction, they're probably not literally true, but they reveal something essential about how Romans saw themselves. As a people forged from violence, survivors who did whatever was necessary, a civilization built on pragmatism rather than idealism. Archaeological evidence tells us that Rome really did begin as a small settlement of farmers and shepherds around the 8th century BC, one village among many in central Italy, with no particular reason to expect greatness. But from these humble beginnings, from these mud huts and wooden palisades, Rome would build an empire that stretched from the mists of Britain to the deserts of Mesopotamia, from the Atlas Mountains of Africa to the forests of Germany, an empire that would rule over 50 million people and shape the course of Western civilization for the next 2,000 years. For the first 2.5 centuries of its existence, Rome was ruled by kings, 7 of them, according to tradition, each contributing something essential to the city's development. Romulus established the Senate, an advisory council of elders that would outlast every king and emperor. Numa Pompilius, the second king, gave Rome its religious institutions and its calendar. Tullus Hostilius was a warrior who destroyed Alba Longa, Rome's mother city, and absorbed its population. Ancus Marcius built Rome's first bridge across the Tiber and established the port of Ostia. These early kings were probably real men, even if the details of their reigns have been lost to time and legend. Then came the Etruscans. The last three kings of Rome, Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Tarquinius Superbus, were Etruscans who brought civilization to Rome in the form of architecture, engineering, and urban planning. They drained the swamps between the hills and created the Forum, the heart of Roman public life. They built the Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer that still functions today. They constructed the first stone walls and the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill. Under Etruscan rule, Rome transformed from a collection of villages into a proper city. But the Etruscans also brought something else: tyranny. Tarquin the Proud, the seventh and final king, ruled with such arrogance and cruelty that he made the very word king hateful to Roman ears for the rest of their history. The breaking point came in 509 BC with an act of unspeakable violation. Sextus Tarquinius, the king's son, raped Lucretia, the wife of a Roman nobleman. Lucretia, though innocent, felt her honor was destroyed. She summoned her father and husband, told them what had happened, made them swear to avenge her, and then took a knife and plunged it into her own heart. As she lay dying, she said, "No unchaste woman shall henceforth live," and claim Lucretia as her example. Her death ignited a revolution. Lucius Junius Brutus, a man who had pretended to be simple-minded to survive Tarquin's paranoia, revealed himself as a brilliant leader and rallied the people. The Tarquins were expelled from Rome, and Brutus declared that Rome would never again bow to a king. The monarchy was dead. In its place, the Romans created something unprecedented: a republic, a government of laws rather than men, where power was shared, limited, and constantly checked. Two consuls would lead the state, each with the power to veto the other, each serving for only 1 year. The Senate would advise and guide. The people would vote in assemblies. It was messy, inefficient, and prone to gridlock, but it was also resilient, adaptable, and capable of greatness. The early republic was a time of constant struggle, both external and internal. Outside Rome's walls, enemies surrounded them on every side. The Etruscans seeking to restore their king, the Latin League resenting Rome's growing power, the mountain tribes raiding the lowlands. Inside Rome, the patricians, the aristocratic families who claimed descent from the original senators, monopolized political power, while the plebeians, the common citizens who made up the majority of the population, demanded a voice in government. This class conflict, the struggle of the orders, would define Roman politics for 2 centuries. The plebeians discovered their power when they realized that Rome's army depended on them. In 494 BC, they staged the first recorded strike in history. They marched out of Rome to the Sacred Mount and refused to return until their demands were met. The patricians, facing military collapse, had no choice but to negotiate. The plebeians won the right to elect their own officials, called tribunes, who could veto any law or action that harmed plebeian interests. Over the next 200 years, through persistence and occasional threats of secession, the plebeians won more and more rights until, by the 3rd century BC, Rome had become something approaching a democracy, at least for its citizens. In 390 BC, Rome faced its greatest crisis yet. A massive army of Gauls swept down from the north, defeated the Roman legions at the Battle of Allia, and sacked the city. For months, the Gauls occupied Rome, burning and looting, while the last defenders held out on the Capitoline Hill. According to legend, the Romans finally bought off the Gauls with 1,000 pounds of gold. And when the Romans complained that the Gauls were using false weights, the Gallic chieftain Brennus threw his sword onto the scales and said, "Vi victis, woe to the conquered." It was a humiliation that Rome would never forget and never forgive. But Rome rebuilt, stronger than before. The Romans constructed massive stone walls, the Servian walls, that would protect the city for centuries. More importantly, they learned a crucial lesson. In a world of predators, you could either be the conqueror or the conquered, and Rome chose to be the conqueror. Over the next century, Rome systematically conquered central Italy, fighting a series of brutal wars against the Samnites, tough mountain warriors who nearly broke Roman power. The Samnite Wars lasted 50 years and cost tens of thousands of lives, but Rome emerged victorious. Then came Pyrrhus, the brilliant Greek king who invaded Italy in 280 BC to help the Greek cities of southern Italy resist Roman expansion. Pyrrhus won battle after battle, but each victory cost him so many men that he allegedly said, "One more such victory and I shall be utterly ruined," giving us the term Pyrrhic victory. Rome, meanwhile, simply raised new legions and kept fighting. Pyrrhus eventually gave up and went home, and by 270 BC, Rome controlled the entire Italian peninsula from the Po River to the toe of the boot. Rome's genius wasn't just military, it was political. Instead of ruling conquered peoples as subjects, Rome offered them partnership. Some became full Roman citizens. Others became allies with autonomy in exchange for military support. The result was a system where former enemies became stakeholders in Rome's success, where every conquest added not just territory but manpower. Rome had discovered the secret that would carry it to world domination. The more it conquered, the stronger it became, because every victory added soldiers to its legions. The Romans had transformed warfare into a self-sustaining cycle of expansion, and they were about to unleash that cycle on the Mediterranean world. Across the Mediterranean, in North Africa, stood Carthage, a Phoenician city-state that controlled a maritime empire stretching from Spain to Sicily. Carthage was everything Rome was not: ancient, wealthy, sophisticated, a nation of traders and sailors who measured success in gold rather than glory. For centuries, Rome and Carthage had coexisted peacefully, but in 264 BC, a minor dispute over Sicily brought them into conflict, and what began as a limited war would become a struggle for survival that lasted over a century and nearly destroyed both civilizations. The First Punic War was primarily naval, which presented Rome with an immediate problem. Romans were farmers and soldiers, not sailors. Carthage had the finest navy in the world, ships that had ruled the Mediterranean for generations. But Rome, with characteristic stubbornness, decided to build a navy from scratch. According to legend, they captured a Carthaginian warship that had run aground, took it apart to understand how it was built, and then constructed an entire fleet based on that single ship. Within 60 days, Rome had 100 warships. They didn't know how to sail them properly, so they invented the corvus, a boarding bridge that turned naval battles into land battles, allowing Roman soldiers to storm enemy ships as if they were fortresses. It was crude, dangerous, and brilliant, and it worked. After 23 years of war, Rome defeated Carthage and took Sicily, Rome's first overseas province. Carthage paid a massive indemnity and retreated to lick its wounds. But in Carthage, a general named Hamilcar Barca refused to accept defeat. He took his young son to the temple and made the boy swear eternal hatred of Rome. That boy's name was Hannibal, and he would become Rome's greatest nightmare. In 218 BC, Hannibal launched the Second Punic War by doing the impossible. He marched an army from Spain to Italy over the Alps, bringing war elephants through mountain passes where no one thought an army could go. The crossing killed half his men and most of his elephants, but Hannibal emerged in northern Italy with a veteran army and a burning desire for revenge. What followed was a masterclass in military genius. At the Trebia River, Hannibal lured the Romans into an ambush and destroyed their army. At Lake Trasimene, he caught another Roman army in a valley and slaughtered 15,000 men in 3 hours. The Romans appointed Fabius Maximus as dictator, and Fabius pursued a strategy of avoiding battle, shadowing Hannibal's army but never engaging, trying to wear him down through attrition. The Romans mocked Fabius as a coward, but his Fabian strategy was probably the only thing that saved Rome in those dark days. Then came Cannae. In 216 BC, the Romans decided they'd had enough of caution. They assembled the largest army in Roman history, 80,000 men, and marched to confront Hannibal's 50,000. What happened next is still studied in military academies today as the perfect example of tactical genius. Hannibal arranged his army in a crescent shape, with his weakest troops in the center and his strongest on the flanks. The Romans, seeing the weak center, charged straight at it. Hannibal's center gave ground slowly, drawing the Romans deeper and deeper into the crescent. Then Hannibal's cavalry, having routed the Roman cavalry, attacked from behind, while his heavy infantry on the flanks closed in from the sides. The Romans were surrounded, packed so tightly they couldn't use their weapons. For 8 hours, the Carthaginians slaughtered them. By the end of the day, 50,000 to 70,000 Romans lay dead, the worst defeat in Roman history. Hannibal sent bushels of gold rings back to Carthage, rings taken from the fingers of dead Roman senators and knights. Rome should have surrendered. Any rational nation would have. But Rome was not rational. Rome was stubborn to the point of insanity. The Senate refused to even discuss peace. They raised new legions from boys and old men, armed slaves, and promised them freedom, and kept fighting. Hannibal marched up and down Italy for 13 years, winning battle after battle. But he couldn't take Rome itself, and gradually the tide began to turn. A young Roman general named Publius Cornelius Scipio studied Hannibal's tactics, learned from them, and then improved on them. Scipio took the war to Spain, conquered Carthage's Spanish territories, and then did the unthinkable. He invaded North Africa, threatening Carthage itself. Hannibal was recalled to defend his homeland, and in 202 BC, at the Battle of Zama, the student faced the master. Scipio used Hannibal's own tactics against him, and for the first time in his career, Hannibal was decisively defeated. Carthage surrendered, paid a crushing indemnity, gave up its navy, and became a Roman client state. Scipio was given the honorific Africanus for his victory, and Rome emerged from the Second Punic War as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. But the war had cost Rome dearly, hundreds of thousands dead, the Italian countryside devastated, an entire generation traumatized by Hannibal's invasion. For 50 years, Carthage remained at peace, rebuilding its economy and paying its debts to Rome. But in Rome, one senator could not let go of his hatred. Marcus Porcius Cato ended every speech he gave in the Senate, regardless of topic, with the same phrase, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed. In 149 BC, Rome manufactured a pretext for war, and the Third Punic War began. This wasn't a war of conquest or defense. It was a war of annihilation. For 3 years, Roman armies besieged Carthage. The Carthaginians fought with desperate courage, knowing they faced extinction. When the Romans finally breached the walls in 146 BC, they fought house to house, room to room, for 6 days. The Romans killed or enslaved every Carthaginian they found, burned the city to the ground, and according to legend, plowed the ruins with salt so nothing would ever grow there again. Carthage, the great rival that had nearly destroyed Rome, was erased from the earth. While Rome was destroying Carthage in the west, it was also conquering the east. The kingdoms that had emerged from Alexander the Great's empire, Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, Ptolemaic Egypt, were wealthy, cultured, and militarily weak. Rome crushed them one by one. The Macedonian Wars ended with Macedon becoming a Roman province. The Seleucid king Antiochus III invaded Greece and was humiliated at the Battle of Magnesia. Egypt became a Roman client state, its kings ruling only with Rome's permission. By 146 BC, the same year Carthage fell, Rome also destroyed Corinth, one of Greece's greatest cities, as a warning to anyone who might resist Roman power. Rome now controlled the entire Mediterranean, a sea they called Mare Nostrum, our sea. Roman soldiers returned home laden with Greek art, Greek slaves who served as tutors, Greek books of philosophy and science. Roman generals built temples with the spoils of conquest. Roman aristocrats competed to display their wealth and culture. But this influx of wealth and Greek ideas also changed Rome in ways that would prove fatal to the Republic. Roman soldiers came home to find their farms had been bought up by wealthy aristocrats who used slave labor from conquered territories. Veterans who had spent years fighting for Rome found themselves landless and unemployed. Wealth inequality exploded. The Senate became corrupt, more interested in personal power than the good of the Republic. Rome had conquered the world, but in doing so, it had planted the seeds of its own destruction. The first crack appeared in 133 BC, when a young aristocrat named Tiberius Gracchus was elected tribune. Tiberius looked at Rome and saw a crisis. Wealthy landowners had monopolized the public land, using slave labor to work vast estates, while Roman citizens, who had fought in the legions, returned to find no land, no work, no future. Tiberius proposed a land reform bill that would redistribute public land to poor citizens, and the Senate, dominated by the wealthy landowners who would lose from this reform, was horrified. When Tiberius bypassed the Senate and took his bill directly to the people, the Senate saw it as a threat to their power. On the day of the vote, a group of senators and their supporters armed themselves with clubs and pieces of broken furniture, marched to the Forum, and beat Tiberius Gracchus to death along with 300 of his supporters. For the first time in the Republic's history, Roman blood had been deliberately spilled in the Forum over politics. A line had been crossed. 10 years later, Tiberius's younger brother Gaius Gracchus was elected tribune and continued his brother's reforms, going even further. The Senate responded the same way, declaring martial law and hunting down Gaius and his supporters. Gaius ordered his slave to kill him rather than be captured, and the Senate murdered 3,000 of his followers. The Gracchi brothers had tried to save the Republic by reforming it, and the Senate had killed them for it. The lesson was clear: violence worked. The rules no longer mattered. The Republic was eating itself. Into this chaos stepped two generals who would make the Gracchi look like amateurs: Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Marius was a military genius from a humble background who reformed the Roman legions, transforming them from a citizen militia into a professional army. But Marius's reforms had an unintended consequence. Soldiers were now loyal to their generals rather than to Rome, because their generals, not the state, promised them land and plunder when their service ended. Sulla was a patrician, a brilliant general and a ruthless politician who believed the Senate's power was sacred and must be preserved at any cost. When a war broke out against King Mithridates of Pontus, both Marius and Sulla claimed the command. The Senate gave it to Sulla, but Marius convinced the People's Assembly to override the Senate and give it to him instead. Sulla's response was unprecedented and unthinkable. He marched his legions on Rome itself. For the first time in Roman history, a Roman general attacked Rome with a Roman army. Sulla seized the city, declared Marius an enemy of the state, and then left for the east to fight Mithridates. As soon as Sulla left, Marius returned with his own army, took Rome, and massacred Sulla's supporters. Marius died soon after, but when Sulla returned victorious from the east in 82 BC, he marched on Rome again, defeated Marius's faction in a civil war that killed hundreds of thousands, and declared himself dictator. Sulla then introduced the prescriptions, a system of legalized murder that would haunt Rome for generations. He posted lists of his political enemies in the Forum. Anyone on the list could be killed by anyone, and the killer would receive a reward. Thousands of senators, knights, and citizens were murdered, their property confiscated. Sulla used the terror to consolidate power, reformed the constitution to strengthen the Senate, and then, in an act that shocked everyone, voluntarily resigned his dictatorship and retired to private life. He had proven that one man with an army could seize Rome, reshape it according to his will, and walk away. The precedent was set, and ambitious men were watching. The most ambitious of all was Gaius Julius Caesar, a patrician who combined aristocratic breeding with populist politics, military genius with political cunning, and ruthless pragmatism with personal charm. Caesar formed an alliance with two other powerful men, Pompey the Great, Rome's most successful general, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's wealthiest man. This first triumvirate, three men who together controlled Rome's military, money, and political machinery, carved up the republic between them. Caesar took the province of Gaul, and for 9 years he waged a war of conquest that killed over 1 million Gauls and enslaved 1 million more, bringing unimaginable wealth back to Rome and creating a battle-hardened army fanatically loyal to him personally. When Crassus died fighting the Parthians in the east, the alliance collapsed. Pompey, jealous of Caesar's success and alarmed by his power, allied with the Senate against him. In 49 BC, the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, knowing that without his army, Caesar would be prosecuted and destroyed. Caesar faced an impossible choice: obey and be destroyed, or disobey and start a civil war. He chose war. On January 10, 49 BC, Caesar stood at the Rubicon River, the boundary between his province and Italy proper. Roman law forbade any general from bringing an army across the Rubicon. To do so was an act of treason punishable by death. Caesar's officers waited for his decision. According to the historian Suetonius, Caesar quoted a line from Greek comedy, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. Then he crossed the river. With that single step, Caesar didn't just cross a river. He crossed the line between republic and empire, between the old Rome and the new. Civil war had begun. The war that followed raged across the Mediterranean. Caesar chased Pompey to Greece and defeated him at the Battle of Pharsalus, though Pompey escaped to Egypt. When Caesar arrived in Egypt, he was presented with Pompey's severed head. The Egyptian pharaoh, a boy controlled by his advisors, had murdered Pompey, hoping to win Caesar's favor. Caesar wept at the sight of his former friend and ally's head, then conquered Egypt, installing Cleopatra as queen and beginning a legendary romance. Caesar returned to Rome as dictator, implementing sweeping reforms. He restructured the calendar, giving us the Julian calendar we still use, reformed the Senate, settled veterans on land, began massive building projects, and centralized power in his own hands. But Caesar made a fatal mistake. He was too successful, too popular, too obviously the master of Rome. Rumors spread that he planned to make himself king, a title Romans had hated for 500 years. A conspiracy formed, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, both senators who believed they were saving the republic from tyranny. On March 15, 44 BC, the Ides of March, as Caesar entered the Senate, the conspirators surrounded him. One grabbed his toga, pulling it down to immobilize him, and then the daggers came out. 23 times they stabbed him, senators taking turns plunging blades into the man who had conquered Gaul and defeated Pompey. According to legend, when Caesar saw Brutus among his attackers, he said in Greek, "Kai su teknon," you too, child? Then he pulled his toga over his head, refusing to let them see him die, and collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue. The conspirators thought they had saved the Republic. They were wrong. They had killed it. Caesar's assassination plunged Rome into chaos. The conspirators had no plan beyond murder. They expected the Republic to simply resume functioning, as if Caesar had never existed. Instead, they found themselves facing Caesar's loyal lieutenant Mark Antony, who turned Caesar's funeral into a political weapon, reading Caesar's will to the crowd and displaying his bloodstained toga. The mob rioted, hunting down the conspirators, who fled Rome in fear for their lives. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source: Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son, a sickly 18-year-old named Gaius Octavius, who now called himself Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, Octavian. Octavian was everything his great-uncle was not: young, inexperienced, physically weak, and seemingly unremarkable. But he possessed something Caesar lacked: patience and political cunning that bordered on genius. Octavian formed an alliance with Mark Antony and another of Caesar's generals, Marcus Lepidus, creating the Second Triumvirate. Unlike the First Triumvirate, which had been an informal agreement, the Second Triumvirate was given legal authority by the Senate to restore the Republic, though everyone knew they planned to rule it. The Triumvirate's first act was to revive Sulla's proscriptions. They drew up lists of their enemies, senators, knights, anyone wealthy enough to confiscate or dangerous enough to eliminate. 2,000 people were murdered in the purges, including Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, who had opposed both Caesar and Antony. Antony's soldiers hunted Cicero down and killed him, cutting off his head and hands and nailing them to the speaker's platform in the forum as a warning to anyone who might use words against the triumvirate. In 42 BC, Octavian and Antony crossed to Greece and confronted the assassins' army at Philippi. The battle was brutal and chaotic, but in the end, Brutus and Cassius were defeated and committed suicide. The Republic's last defenders were dead. The triumvirate divided the Roman world between them. Octavian took the west, Antony took the east, and Lepidus took Africa. For a decade, this arrangement held, but everyone knew it couldn't last. 3 men cannot share supreme power indefinitely. Eventually, one must rule alone. Lepidus overreached, trying to seize Sicily, and Octavian swiftly stripped him of his power, leaving him alive but politically neutered. Now only 2 men remained: Octavian in Rome and Antony in Egypt. Antony had fallen under the spell of Cleopatra, the brilliant and ambitious queen of Egypt, who had once been Caesar's lover. Antony married Cleopatra in an Egyptian ceremony, gave her Roman territories as gifts, and declared her son by Caesar, Caesarion, to be Caesar's true heir, implicitly rejecting Octavian's claim. Octavian, a master of propaganda, portrayed Antony as a traitor seduced by an Eastern queen, a Roman general who had abandoned his culture and his people for foreign luxuries and a foreign woman. In 31 BC, Octavian declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra, a brilliant political move that framed the conflict as Rome against a foreign threat rather than another civil war. The 2 sides met at Actium off the coast of Greece in a naval battle that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean world. Antony and Cleopatra commanded a large fleet, but their crews were inexperienced and their ships were heavy and slow. Octavian's Admiral Agrippa commanded a smaller but more maneuverable fleet crewed by veterans. The battle was a disaster for Antony. His fleet was outmaneuvered and destroyed, and in the midst of the fighting, Cleopatra's ships suddenly turned and fled. Antony, seeing his lover abandon the battle, followed her, leaving his remaining ships to be captured or sunk. Antony and Cleopatra fled to Alexandria, knowing the end was near. When Octavian's army arrived in Egypt the following year, Antony received a false report that Cleopatra had killed herself. Devastated, he fell on his sword. The report was wrong. Cleopatra was alive, and Antony was carried to her, dying in her arms. Cleopatra tried to negotiate with Octavian, but he made it clear she would be paraded through Rome in his triumph, a humiliation she refused to accept. On August 12, 30 BC, Cleopatra committed suicide, allegedly by allowing an asp, a poisonous snake, to bite her. Octavian found her dead, dressed in her royal regalia, lying on a golden couch. He ordered Caesarion, Cleopatra's son by Caesar, to be murdered, eliminating any rival claim to Caesar's legacy. Egypt was annexed as a Roman province, its vast wealth flowing into Octavian's hands. Octavian returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Roman world. He had won, but he faced a delicate problem: how to rule without appearing to rule, how to be king without being called king. Romans hated the very word king, and Caesar's fate had proven that anyone who seemed too monarchical would be assassinated. So Octavian created a brilliant illusion. In 27 BC, he stood before the Senate and announced that he was returning all his powers to the Senate and the people, that the Republic was restored. The Senate, which Octavian had carefully packed with his supporters, immediately begged him to reconsider. After much theatrical reluctance, Octavian agreed to accept certain powers and responsibilities: command of the armies, control of the wealthiest provinces, the right to propose laws. He refused the title of dictator or king, instead accepting the modest title of princeps, first citizen. The Senate granted him another title, Augustus, meaning the revered one. And with that, Augustus became the first Roman emperor. He kept all the forms of the Republic. The Senate still met, consuls were still elected, laws were still passed. But the substance of power rested entirely in his hands. It was a constitutional fiction, but it worked. Augustus ruled for 41 years, bringing peace and prosperity after a century of civil wars. He reformed the administration, professionalized the army, built roads and aqueducts, patronized the arts, and expanded the empire's borders. He famously boasted, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble." The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, had begun, 2 centuries of relative stability and prosperity that would be remembered as Rome's golden age. When Augustus died in 14 AD, the transition was smooth. His stepson Tiberius became emperor, and the precedent was set. Rome was an empire ruled by emperors, and the Republic was a memory. Augustus had achieved what Caesar could not. He had transformed Rome from a republic into an empire while maintaining the illusion that nothing had changed. The Republic was dead, but from its ashes rose something even greater: an empire that would dominate the Mediterranean world for 500 years in the west and 1,500 years in the east. The emperors who followed Augustus proved that absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it drives men insane. Tiberius, Augustus's stepson, was a capable general, but a paranoid and bitter emperor who eventually retreated to the island of Capri, ruling Rome through letters while indulging in debaucheries that shocked even Romans. His successor, Caligula, started his reign with promise but descended into madness. He allegedly tried to make his horse a consul, declared himself a living god, and terrorized the Senate until his own guards assassinated him after only 4 years. Claudius, Caligula's uncle, was considered an idiot because of his stammer and physical disabilities, but he proved to be a competent emperor who conquered Britain and reformed the bureaucracy, though he was eventually poisoned by his wife Agrippina so her son Nero could become emperor. Nero was 16 when he became emperor, and for the first 5 years, guided by wise advisors, he ruled well. But as he matured, his true nature emerged. He was an artist who wanted to be loved, a performer who craved applause, and an emperor who saw no reason why he shouldn't do exactly as he pleased. He murdered his mother, his wives, and anyone who criticized his poetry or singing. In 64 AD, a great fire destroyed much of Rome, and rumors spread that Nero had started it to clear space for his new palace. Nero blamed the Christians, a new religious sect, and began the first persecution of Christians in Roman history, having them burned alive as human torches to light his gardens. When military commanders finally revolted in 68 AD, Nero fled Rome and committed suicide, allegedly saying, "What an artist dies in me." But Rome survived these mad emperors because the system Augustus had created was stronger than any individual. The army, the bureaucracy, the provinces, they all continued functioning regardless of who sat on the throne. After a brief civil war, the year of 4 emperors in 69 AD, stability returned under the Flavian dynasty, and then came what historians call the 5 good emperors: Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, who ruled from 96 to 180 AD and brought Rome to the absolute zenith of its power and prosperity. Trajan was perhaps the greatest of them all, a soldier emperor who expanded the empire to its greatest territorial extent. He conquered Dacia, the region north of the Danube, bringing vast gold mines under Roman control that financed decades of building projects. He pushed into Parthia, briefly capturing their capital and reaching the Persian Gulf, the farthest east Rome would ever reach. Under Trajan, the empire stretched from the Scottish Highlands to the Sahara Desert, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Euphrates River, encompassing 5 million square kilometers and 50 million people, roughly a quarter of the world's population at the time. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, was a different kind of emperor, a philosopher-architect, and traveler who spent more than half his reign touring the provinces. Hadrian understood that Rome had reached its natural limits, that further expansion would overextend the empire's resources. So instead of conquest, he focused on consolidation. In Britain, he built Hadrian's Wall, a massive stone fortification stretching 73 miles across northern England, marking the boundary between civilization and barbarism. He rebuilt the Pantheon in Rome with its revolutionary concrete dome, still standing today as one of the architectural marvels of the ancient world. He fell in love with a Greek youth named Antinous, and when Antinous drowned in the Nile, Hadrian's grief was so profound that he founded a city in his memory and had him deified, a very Roman response to personal tragedy. The last of the 5 good emperors was Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who wrote Meditations, one of the foundational texts of Stoic philosophy, while campaigning on the frozen Danube frontier. Marcus Aurelius embodied the Stoic ideal: duty before pleasure, reason before emotion, acceptance of fate. He spent most of his reign fighting wars he didn't want, dealing with plagues that killed millions, and managing an empire that was beginning to show cracks. But he did his duty day after day, year after year, because that's what Rome required of him. This was Rome's golden age, a time when you could travel from Britain to Syria using Roman roads, protected by Roman legions, trading with Roman coins, governed by Roman law. The empire had never been more prosperous, more peaceful, more powerful. Massive aqueducts brought fresh water to cities across the empire. 11 aqueducts supplied Rome alone, delivering over 1 million cubic meters of water daily. Roman engineers built bridges, roads, and harbors that would last for centuries. The Colosseum hosted gladiatorial games that drew crowds of 50,000. Public baths were centers of social life, where rich and poor bathed together and discussed philosophy, politics, and gossip. Roman literature, art, and architecture reached heights that wouldn't be matched for over 1,000 years. But there was a darkness beneath the glory. The empire's prosperity rested on slavery. Millions of slaves captured in war or born into bondage, working the mines, the fields, the workshops, the households. Gladiatorial games, which we romanticize today, were brutal spectacles where men killed each other for entertainment, where criminals were torn apart by wild animals, where the crowd could decide life or death with a gesture. The provinces were exploited for Rome's benefit, their wealth extracted by corrupt governors and tax collectors. And the peace of the Pax Romana was maintained by military force, the legion stationed on the frontiers, ready to crush any rebellion, any threat to Roman power. Still, for 2 centuries, the system worked. The empire was stable, prosperous, and seemingly eternal. Romans couldn't imagine a world without Rome. It had always been there. It would always be there. They were wrong. Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, and with him died Rome's golden age. His son Commodus became emperor, and everything began to fall apart. Commodus was everything his father was not: vain, cruel, incompetent, and utterly uninterested in governing. He saw himself as a reincarnation of Hercules and spent his time fighting as a gladiator in the arena, always winning, of course, since his opponents were ordered to lose or face execution. He renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana after himself and declared that the months of the year should be renamed after his titles. The Senate despised him, the people mocked him, and finally, in 192 AD, his own advisors had him strangled by a wrestler. His death triggered the year of 5 emperors, a civil war where 5 different men claimed the throne in a single year, armies marching on Rome, the empire tearing itself apart. The winner was Septimius Severus, a tough African general who restored order, but fundamentally changed the nature of the empire. Severus's advice to his sons was brutally simple: enrich the soldiers and scorn all others. He increased military pay, gave soldiers more privileges, and made it clear that the army, not the Senate, was the true source of imperial power. It was a pragmatic policy that worked in the short term but poisoned the long term. From now on, the army would make and unmake emperors, and the empire would be ruled by whoever could pay the legions. The 3rd century AD was a nightmare. Between 235 and 284 AD, a period of just 50 years, Rome had 26 different emperors, and only one died of natural causes. Generals fought generals for the throne, while barbarian tribes poured across the frontiers, taking advantage of Roman weakness. The Goths raided the Balkans. The Sassanid Persians invaded the east, even capturing a Roman emperor, Valerian, in battle, an unprecedented humiliation. Plague swept through the empire, killing millions. The economy collapsed as emperors debased the currency to pay their soldiers, causing hyperinflation. Trade routes broke down. Cities shrank. The population declined. The empire was coming apart at the seams. And for a time, it seemed like Rome might simply cease to exist. But Rome was saved by 2 remarkable emperors who rebuilt the empire from the ruins. Diocletian, who became emperor in 284 AD, realized that the empire had become too large, too complex, too threatened on too many fronts for one man to rule effectively. So he did something unprecedented. He divided the empire in 2, creating an Eastern Empire and a Western Empire, each with its own emperor. He went further, creating the Tetrarchy, rule by 4, with 2 senior emperors, Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, Caesars, who would eventually succeed them. It was a system designed to prevent civil wars and ensure smooth succession, and for 20 years it actually worked. Diocletian reformed the administration, the army, the tax system, and the economy, stabilizing the empire and ending the crisis. Then, in 305 AD, he did something no Roman emperor had done since Augustus. He voluntarily retired, spending his last years growing cabbages in his palace in modern-day Croatia. The Tetrarchy didn't survive Diocletian's retirement. Civil wars broke out almost immediately, but from the chaos emerged Constantine, who would change Rome forever. Constantine won a series of civil wars and reunited the empire under his sole rule, but his most significant act had nothing to do with military conquest. In 312 AD, before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine claimed he had a vision of a cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." He had his soldiers paint Christian symbols on their shields, won the battle, and attributed his victory to the Christian God. The following year, he issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious tolerance throughout the empire and ending the persecution of Christians. Constantine's conversion transformed Christianity from a persecuted sect into the empire's favored religion. He built churches across the empire, including the first St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. He convened the Council of Nicaea to settle theological disputes and establish Orthodox Christian doctrine. And in 330 AD, he founded a new capital in the east, Constantinople, built on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, strategically located where Europe meets Asia, easily defensible and positioned to control trade routes between east and west. Constantinople would be the new Rome, and in many ways, it would outlive the old one. Constantine died in 337 AD, and the empire he left behind was fundamentally different from the one Augustus had created. The old Roman religion was dying, replaced by Christianity. The capital had moved from Rome to Constantinople. The empire was increasingly divided between a Latin-speaking West and a Greek-speaking East. The Senate had lost all real power. The army was increasingly composed of barbarian mercenaries rather than Roman citizens. Rome was still powerful, still vast, but the cracks were widening, and everyone could feel the ground shifting beneath their feet. The Western Empire's last century was a slow-motion collapse. Barbarian tribes, Goths, Vandals, Franks, Saxons, Huns, pushed against the frontiers, and Rome no longer had the strength to push back. Sometimes Rome tried to buy them off with gold. Sometimes Rome hired them as mercenaries. Sometimes Rome just let them settle inside the empire's borders, hoping they would defend Roman territory against other barbarians. It was a desperate strategy that couldn't last. In 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, a Gothic army annihilated a Roman army and killed the Eastern Emperor Valens. It was a shocking defeat that proved Rome was no longer invincible. In 410 AD, Alaric and his Visigoths sacked Rome itself, the first time in 800 years that a foreign enemy had breached the city's walls. The psychological impact was devastating. St. Jerome, writing from Jerusalem, said, "The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken." If Rome could fall, what was safe? What was eternal? The Western Empire staggered on for another 66 years, each year weaker than the last. Emperors became puppets controlled by barbarian generals. Provinces were abandoned or lost. Britain was left to fend for itself and quickly fell to Saxon invaders. North Africa fell to the Vandals. Gaul fell to the Franks. Spain fell to the Visigoths. The Western Empire shrank until it was little more than Italy, and even Italy was contested. The last Western Roman emperor was a boy named Romulus Augustulus, a cruel joke of history that the last emperor shared names with the first king and the first emperor. In 476 AD, a barbarian general named Odoacer marched into Ravenna, where the imperial court had fled for safety, and told the teenage emperor that his services were no longer required. Romulus Augustulus was pensioned off, sent to live in a villa in Campania with a generous allowance. He probably lived to old age, dying in obscurity, the last emperor of the West. Odoacer sent the imperial regalia, the crown, the purple robes, the symbols of Roman authority, to Constantinople to the Eastern Emperor with a message. There was no longer any need for a Western emperor. The Roman Empire in the West was over. It ended not with a dramatic battle or a heroic last stand, but with a bureaucratic formality, a teenager being told to go home, an empire simply ceasing to exist because no one had the will or the strength to maintain it any longer. The Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, but the story doesn't end there. The Eastern Roman Empire, what historians would later call the Byzantine Empire, though they called themselves Romans, survived for another 1,000 years. Constantinople stood as the greatest city in Europe, preserving Roman law, Roman culture, and Roman identity through the Middle Ages. Byzantine emperors still called themselves Caesar and Augustus. Byzantine scholars preserved Greek and Roman texts that would have otherwise been lost. Byzantine armies reconquered parts of Italy, North Africa, and Spain in the 6th century under Justinian. Constantinople didn't fall until 1453, when Ottoman Turks finally breached its walls after a siege of 53 days. Even then, the last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, died fighting on the walls, defending his city to the end, a Roman emperor dying as Roman emperors should in battle, refusing to surrender. But what about Rome's legacy in the West? What did Rome leave behind when it fell? The answer is everything. Rome's collapse didn't erase Roman civilization. It transformed it, spread it, embedded it so deeply into Western culture that we barely notice it anymore. Look at the languages of Europe: French, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, Romanian, all descended from Latin, spoken by over 1 billion people today. English, though Germanic in origin, is nearly half Latin in vocabulary, thanks to the Norman conquest and the Church. Every time you use words like government, justice, liberty, republic, senate, you're speaking Latin. Every time you read a calendar, you're using Roman months: July for Julius Caesar, August for Augustus, and the others named after Roman gods and numbers. Look at the law. Roman law, codified by Justinian in the 6th century, became the foundation of legal systems across Europe and, through European colonization, across the world. The concepts of innocent until proven guilty, the right to a fair trial, written contracts, property rights, all Roman. When the American founding fathers designed their government, they studied Roman history obsessively. They created a Senate, a system of checks and balances, a republic where power was distributed to prevent tyranny. The very word republic is Latin residential publica, the public thing, the state that belongs to the people. Look at architecture. Every government building with columns and domes is copying Rome. The Capitol in Washington, D.C. looks like a Roman temple. The Pantheon in Paris is named after the Pantheon in Rome. Courthouses, libraries, universities across the Western world are built in the Roman style because we associate Roman architecture with authority, permanence, civilization. 2,000 years after the Colosseum was built, we're still imitating it. Every modern stadium is essentially a Roman amphitheater. Look at infrastructure. Roman roads still exist, still in use in Britain, France, Spain, Italy. Roman aqueducts still carry water. Roman engineering principles, the arch, the vault, the dome, are still taught and used. The Romans understood that civilization requires infrastructure, that great societies are built on roads and water systems and public works, and we've been following their example ever since. Look at Christianity. Rome persecuted Christians for 3 centuries, but when Rome finally embraced Christianity under Constantine, it transformed the religion from a Middle Eastern sect into a world religion. The Roman Catholic Church, the word Catholic means universal, preserved Roman organizational structure, Roman hierarchy, Roman administrative genius. The Pope's title, Pontifex Maximus, was originally a Roman pagan priesthood. The Church's language was Latin for 1,500 years. Christian theology was shaped by Roman philosophy. Monasteries preserved Roman texts through the Dark Ages. Christianity conquered Rome, but Rome also conquered Christianity, shaping it in Rome's image. Rome fell, but it never truly died. Every Western nation is Rome's child. whether they admit it or not. We inherited Rome's languages, Rome's laws, Rome's architecture, Rome's engineering, Rome's ideas about government and citizenship and empire. We study Roman history because it's our history, the Republic's struggle between liberty and order, the empire's tension between power and morality, the constant question of how to build a civilization that can last. Rome's story is humanity's story writ large, the rise from nothing, the struggle for survival, the conquest of enemies, the corruption of success, the internal conflicts that tear societies apart, the desperate attempts to reform and survive, and finally the inevitable decline and fall. But it's also a story of resilience, of a civilization that, even in death, shaped the world so profoundly that 1,500 years later, we still live in its shadow. From a collection of mud huts on 7 hills beside the Tiber River, Rome built an empire that ruled 50 million people across 3 continents for 1,000 years. It gave us roads and laws, aqueducts and arches, republics and emperors, gladiators and philosophers, Caesar and Augustus, the glory of conquest and the tragedy of hubris. It rose higher than any civilization before it and fell harder than anyone thought possible. And yet, walk through London, Paris, Madrid, Bucharest, Washington, D.C. You'll see Roman columns holding up government buildings, Roman domes crowning cathedrals, Roman words carved in stone, Roman ideas embedded in law. We still debate in senates, aspire to republican virtues, build empires of influence, and dream of pax, peace through power. That is the complete history of ancient Rome. 1,000 years of blood, glory, and betrayal that began with a fratricide on a hill and ended with a boy emperor being sent home by a barbarian general, but whose legacy echoes through every courthouse, every democracy, every road, every word, every idea of Western civilization. Rome fell, but Rome endures. Rome is eternal. Rome is us.